This is The Minimum Commitment, film theory in small doses. Some lives are built to be seen in fragments, a silhouette in motion, a face in reflection, a silence that seems like control until it suddenly breaks open. And sometimes the most revealing thing about a person is not who they are, but how many versions of themselves can they perform before the cracks start to show. I'm Don Lawler, film scholar, sound obsessive, and someone interested in the uneasy places where identity, fantasy, and repression begin to overlap. Let's get into it. Drive opens like a crime film, but refuses the genre's certainties. The man at its center barely speaks. He has no name the audience can hold, no tidy backstory, and almost no emotional transparency. Rather than present a stable character, the film assembles a set of functional roles around him: stuntman, mechanic, getaway driver. And these roles do the work of a life. They provide purpose, utility, and a place to stand. But they are not identities so much as performances, provisional and thin. That provisionality is the film's hinge. What we confront is less a complete person than an emotional projection moving through a sodium-lit Los Angeles. That is why a psychoanalytic reading begins to feel necessary. The film is preoccupied with repression, emotion deferred, desire silenced, the self held in reserve by routine and silence. The driver, played by Ryan Gosling, hides almost everything behind a practiced calm. Yet repression never truly vanishes. It accumulates, pressurizes, and waits. Director Nicolas Winding Refn stages that slow build with a steady formal logic, and the payoff of the movie is the ugly physical force of what happens when buried feeling finally breaks through. What makes this film so haunting is not the plot, but the atmosphere. The way Los Angeles seems to hover between realism and dream. The city was still being lit in many places by the warm sodium vapor glow that gave nighttime streets their amber softness. And that light matters. It warms the shadows, blurs reflection on wet pavement, and gives the whole film a visual texture that feels less contemporary, as if suspended in time. In that sense, the movie becomes a kind of cinematic time capsule. It preserves a version of Los Angeles that no longer quite exists, and that historical disappearance becomes part of the film's emotional logic. The city feels neither fully present nor fully remembered. It feels half memory and half fantasy, as though the streets themselves are drifting through someone's subconscious. That dream state is sustained by the sound as much as by the image. The nighttime driving sequences feel detached from ordinary reality because the synth score does not push an obvious emotional direction. Instead, it moves fluidly, almost languidly, beneath the images, drawing them deeper into abstraction. Scenes begin to feel less like events happening in real time and more like fragments of recollection floating to the surface of the mind. When people hear psychoanalysis, they often think first about dreams or symbols, But psychoanalytic theory is just as concerned with repression, the hidden self, the emotional material people push down in order to keep functioning in the world. That is the territory this film enters almost immediately because the driver is built out of repression. He suppresses anger, desire, fear, loneliness, and even something as basic as a stable sense of self. His silence creates mystery, but it also creates instability. What is buried does not stay buried. As we have said, emotions have a way of waiting, pressing, and eventually finding another way out. In this film, that outlet is violence. What makes the violence so disturbing is not just its intensity, but the way it erupts from stillness. The driver does not process emotion verbally. He processes it physically. So when the brutality arrives, it feels less like action than psychic rupture. Moments of tenderness can collapse into sudden violence because the pressure underneath him has nowhere else to go. The driver's scorpion jacket becomes one of the film's most important symbols. At first glance, it feels iconic, stylized and cool, almost mythic. But psychoanalytically, it behaves more like armor. A constructed image the character wears as if it could hold the self together. Throughout the film, he performs versions of masculinity that feel deliberate rather than natural. Quiet competence, emotional restraint, controlled violence. He resembles an archetype more than a person. Refn reinforces that instability visually through mirrors, reflections, and fragmented compositions, so the driver rarely appears emotionally whole. He seems divided between fantasy and reality, between tenderness and brutality, between protector and predator. The longer the film continues, the less stable those identities become, until the performance itself begins to feel like part of the crisis it was meant to conceal. The elevator scene may be the film's emotional center, and it is certainly the place where its fantasy most visibly breaks apart. For a brief moment, the film allows intimacy to exist in the open. The lighting softens, the movement slows, and the kiss feels suspended outside ordinary time. Then the violence arrives, suddenly and horribly, and the scene becomes a collapse in real time. What makes it so devastating is not simply the brutality itself, but the recognition that follows it. Irene, played by Carey Mulligan, sees what has been hidden beneath the performance. The romantic protector, the quiet and self-contained man she has been reaching toward, is revealed as something far less stable and far more frightening. In that instant, the fantasy disappears. What remains is the evidence of repression finally forcing its way into the open, and from that moment on, the emotional dream that has sustained the film can never fully return. Drive understands that movement itself can become emotional expression. The nighttime driving sequences are rarely about transportation. They feel psychological, as though the city is passing through the driver rather than the other way around. The world glides past the windows in soft abstraction while synth music and ambient sound blur together beneath the images. Silence dominates conversations. Engines hum quietly through empty streets. The soundtrack becomes part of the film's emotional architecture. The city hums beneath the images, and neon reflects endlessly across glass and chrome, turning the whole nighttime world into something hypnotic and suspended. It holds the viewer inside the same detached emotional state as the driver himself. Because the film sustains that condition so carefully, moments of violence hit with greater force. The dream fractures instantly, and the audience feels the rupture physically. Drive is not really about crime. It's about a man trying to construct identity through performance while suppressing everything human underneath it. He moves through Los Angeles like a fantasy of masculine control. Quiet, capable, untouchable. But the film slowly reveals the emotional violence required to maintain that fantasy. Beneath the sodium lights of a disappearing city, Drive captures something haunting. A dream, already fading while we watch. That's your thought for the day. Minimum commitment, maximum meaning. See you next time. The Minimum Commitment is produced, recorded, and edited by Don Lawler. Music by Out of Flux.